Brad, I thought that since the topic of the panel is food system change, that we would start with you because as among the people on the panel, you've been farming the longest. You said about 40 years, right? Yep. Also, you grow corn and soybeans, you raise cows and pigs, so also probably the most traditional farming on the panel. And when we spoke on the phone, you talked about how proud you were of the way that your farm has evolved over the decades. Can you talk about some of the changes that you've made, and then also why you've made those changes? Like, was it more an effort to improve the health of the soil, or was it more about what you were hearing from consumers that they wanted different?
Okay, well, thank you, and I am. I've been farming all my life. Actually, Grandpa and Grandma come over, and my dad was born on the living room floor of the farm that's still in our family. So we're coming up on just about 100 years, and I'm not quite there, but I'm getting close. You can tell by the gray hair. So my wife is actually from the Twin Cities, and so she was a city gal. But our farms have changed, and I think that's probably one of the challenges, I think, personally, and we talk about as a family farm, how do we talk about change and how farms have changed. Over the years, again, my dad is 87, he's still on the farm, and I think of the practices in the time that he's farmed, starting in the 30s, and then myself, you know, what we've seen in agriculture and what we've done. And honestly, I'm very proud. And when we talked on the call, you know, the prayer call about how we've changed and what we've done. And I think so many things. And then after we got married, just talked about, you know, how we used to, everything was moldboard plowed, all the ground was tilled. All the things we've done is because that's the way it was done previous generations and before. As technology come into the scene, and I know everybody here has got a cell phone, and farmers, we all are using technology. And as technology changed, and as we started honestly utilizing things that were at our hands, what can we do better? And to your question, it was soil health. And so even though our farm has grown over the years and it's changed, the technology that we're using being so precise in what farmers do every day. And I just wish that a lot of people could see and walk in our shoes and be with us each day to see how things have changed and why. And I'll just give you a couple examples. I think probably the most predominant change is we're a crop and a livestock. So we raise corn, soybean, wheat, cover crops, and alfalfa. So we are a diversified farm. We use the manure from the livestock as a natural fertilizer for our crops going forward. And again, soil health, how have we built it? And I can, you know, it's honestly a privilege. Right now my son is back with us, so we got 3 generations that sit around the coffee table and discuss and cuss once in a while. But to have that and talk about how things have changed. And Dad has seen that, the genetics we use for crops, what we're getting on the land right now compared to what we did when he started farming and even when I started farming. I can truthfully say our soil is in better shape than it ever has been because we're doing that. We're planting cover crops. This year I had almost 1,000 acres of cover crops to help rebuild the soil back up and put a manure in. And so it's doing things, working with professionals. We have an agronomist that works with us. He's scouting our fields 2 or 3 times a week. We work with a nutritionist, putting exactly in the precise amounts the nutrients that the crop needs.
And are those, sorry to interrupt, are those new things, the agronomist, the nutritionist, how long have you had them working with you?
You know, honestly, in about the last 10 years, and that's what I think so many farmers in the Midwest, and I'm from South Dakota, so we've had a very trying year through the Midwest in weather and things like that. But that's something in the last 10 years that we've employed, you know, honestly, an agronomist in that. So specifically doing what the crop needs, what the land needs in that, and then also on the livestock side, the technology we use there, when we switch the way we were raising our livestock, there's a lot of temperature change in South Dakota, and so when we brought our animals indoors, you know, even though it doesn't look, you know, when people, that's probably our biggest problem is how do we explain how we've changed farming, and we've done a very poor job. I said we've done a great job of changing our farms. We've done a really poor job of explaining how we've done it and why. And so again, all for the right reasons, for animal welfare, for soil health, all those things. Our farm has evolved like so many, and it's doing exactly what the land needs, what the animals need, and that's what, you know, every day when we get up, that's what I think about at night, and honestly when I get up in the day, I'm ready for another day, and I want to do what's right and continue to try to improve, and that's what's happened on farms.
All right, great, thank you. Karen, you came to farming from another profession. You have a master's in occupational biomechanics. Correct?
and ergonomics.
In ergonomics from NYU. So I'm curious, why did you turn to farming? Was it specifically because you wanted to be an agent of change in some way, or was that sort of an after effect?
Well, for me, farming has been somewhat spiritual. I came at it because there was a need. I live in the Bronx, and right now, out of 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranks 62 as the most unhealthiest. And as a physical therapist, I saw the relationship between food and health with a lot of my patients. I had no farming background. My parents weren't farmers. My grandparents weren't farmers. And so I took gardening first, just, reaching out to people, getting books, going to the library. And I was amazed because my relationship to food was from a grocery store. I always tell the story about the tomato. The tomato is what got me into farming because back in the day, tomato was pink and it tastes like cardboard. So when I grew my first tomato, it was on a vine. Who knew? It was red. What? And when I bit into it and the juices flew, I just like, oh my goodness, I'm onto something. And which I didn't have in my neighborhood. But also during that time, back in the late 70s and 80s, believe it or not, New York City had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And so a lot of us, in the beginning it was called guerrilla gardening, just went in and took over those lots. But then people started becoming organized because just think about a marginalized community with no resources. The city had no money at the time. People got together and turned these empty lots into community gardens. And for the first time, people were aware of the relationship between food and health. Diet-related diseases, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesities, all these things people were telling us that was happening in a neighborhood, but no resources because you would go block after block after block and see the fast food, the junk food, the processed food. That's my sort of a pyramid for the food that's in my neighborhood. And it was people in our communities that said, you know what, we need to do better. We cannot find or have access to healthy food, so let's start growing the food in our community gardens. So for me, it started at the community garden level, learning about the relationship between food and health, being organized with people with no resources, coming together and growing food that was culturally appropriate, which is really, really important, but also giving us the incentive to want to change the food system. Before that, the food system was just something that, again, you got from a supermarket. But with community garden and urban gardening work, you found out that when you work in cities, that is political. And so again, here we are, 2019, again, community gardens and urban farms in New York City is political. And as we increase the need for development, we also need to maintain the green spaces that we have. So now we're here, 2019, with community gardens and urban farms on everybody's lips, but yet, again, we're lacking resources and also the fact like who is the ownership of land. Fast forward, I'm now a rural farmer because for me, looking at the food system, when people talk about the food system that is supposed to be just and sustainable, well, in New York State, out of 57,000 farmers, only 133 are Black. And so if we're going to talk about a food system that is just and sustainable, it needs to have our faces and our voices. And we need to be able to have the resources to go back to the land. I know my daughter, Leah Petterman, talking about going back to the land. We need to have the land. We need to have the resources because we know how to farm.
And what would be some of the main things that could be done to get more Black and brown people onto the land?
I always say three things. Opportunity, access to land, resources, and capital. Give us the opportunity, and I always say, give us the opportunity. People who deem powerless then become powerful. Right. Back to the land, free the land, y'all, free the land.
Thank you. Okay, Noah, you have a background in digital marketing, and you got a $1 million prize from Facebook recently, correct?
Yes.
So can you tell us how you went from digital marketing to farming, how you got $1 million from Facebook, and how you're using social media to change the farming system? in Kenya?
Well, I started before digital marketing. It was just basic information technology. And what happened is that I kept on doing it, and then I was lured into farming initially. I was lured into, because I was told if you put $400, you'll get $4,000 in 3 months. I did not even recover the $400. And again, I was told I was given a contract to plant cabbages for somebody. I planted 6 acres.
Couple thousand?
Yeah, so that was 75,000 cabbages. When it came time to harvest, I was stuck with 75,000 cabbages because the person who gave me the contract didn't just show up. But so what I asked myself, I was still young, I could bounce back. But what about this other farmer who that is everything to them? And so I decided to start a group on Facebook. It's called Africa Farmers Club, just to have a few farmers around me so that we could discuss about the challenges that farmers are facing. This would be challenges like agronomic support, because the ratio of extension officers to agronomists to farmers in Kenya is 1,200 farmers to 1 agronomist. And that becomes a problem. The biggest challenge that farmers are facing in Africa, especially, is lack of credible information from reliable sources. And so with this group, what we did is we decided to start having discussions. And the discussions were online. But at the same time, I started visiting farmers because I wanted to learn. I asked myself, how come there's no ag-based company that goes under? But farmers are always complaining, And so in the process of visiting farmers, which as of now I've visited close to 4,000 farmers in the last 3 years.
So now you're now Africa-wide, correct?
Yes, Africa-wide. What we have done is that we are narrowing down, first of all, to start with East Africa, and then now we go out. But we have members, 138,000 members now currently across Africa. And what we're doing, thanks to Facebook, we are able to reach out to more farmers. We have a program called the Satellite Farmer Program, which we want to use the same experience that I had, and also many other farmers, lack of reliable information. So what we're doing is that we're creating smaller hubs in farms. It's called the Satellite Farmer Program, which we're giving out inputs to the farmers for them to be able to create smaller demonstration farms in their own farms in different regions in Kenya, so that farmers can be able to get this first-hand information, practical information, so that it's not just about giving farmers fertilizers. It's about showing them whether they even need the fertilizer. Brothers talked about soil health. We don't even know how to test our soils. So this is some of the basic things that we really want farmers to be able to get access to.
So the Facebook group is just farmers talking to farmers. There's not sort of a main person who's determining what the conversation is or directing you in terms of what sorts of fertilizers.
A lot has been said and discussed and talked about farmers, but it has been very rare opportunities, even like this, for farmers to be brought to the stage to talk about it. And for me, Facebook stood out because Facebook brought a farmer to the table and said, Noah, this is what you're doing. We've seen what you're doing. What can you do? What can we do to help you more? And so the Facebook group is for us to be able to connect, because I could not connect to 138,000 farmers. And so what we have done is that we have looked around and seen who are some of these agronomists, these companies that really have the heart of farmers in them, and with that they guide us. So we have approached some of them, and also through the Satellite Farmer Program that we are running, we are training young people so that we can be able to help reduce that gap.
That was my next question, are you getting a sense that is it mostly a younger demographic, and is that helping to sort of bring the new generation into farming in Africa? Yes,
definitely, because what has happened in the past, I was young when I started the group, and even when I started farming. I'm not that old, but it's because a lot has been said. A few weeks ago, there was a New York Times article about making agriculture sexy to the youth in Africa. But again, the panel that just left the stage mentioned something very important. We eat 3 times a day. And so if we had to change that and say food is actually, make food attractive to the youth, it's a lie. So what we are trying to do is that we do not just want to make it attractive, we want to work with the young people who are already in agriculture, for them to be able to see this really works out. Once that works out for them, then their friends will be able to see this is worth them getting into it. And it's not just about going and digging the whole day. We've got a very interesting mix of young people people who have done, basically even with my background in tech, now using social media as a platform to be able to exchange information. We have e-extension officers now, because now they do not have their farms, but they can be able to share this information that they have to the other farmers.
And is that they're paid extension officers, or how does that work? Is that all volunteer?
So what has happened in the past is that most of the extension and agronomists are company-based. So what they do is that they have to come and sell to you fertilizer or chemicals or something like that. But for us, we're getting farmers who are willing to be able to pay something, to be able to get this right information. Just like what Brad is doing. Some of these farmers even require an agronomist. So once they have seen in the group that this person has credible information, they're willing to share, which is one of the biggest.
And was that part of your reason for founding this in the first place, to get around having to get your information from Monsanto or Syngenta, or?
Yes, I really tried, and so many other farmers really tried to get into agriculture, going through these companies and buying these seeds and all this, but it all ended up at buying the seed. Or the fertilizer. There was nobody coming knocking and asking, hey, what have you done? You bought seeds. We don't know. Where did you go? Did you even sell? Did you even produce? Did you even plant the seeds? You know? And so because of that, we saw a very big need of farmers exchanging information. When farmers meet, the information we share is amazing.
Going back to the age question, when we were on the phone, Brad, you talked about how the aging demographic of the American farmer, which I think you said is mid to high 50s. And generally when you hear that conversation, it's like, oh, this looming catastrophe. And you were like, oh yeah, the farmers are getting really old. And it was like you're very excited about it. So can you translate that for us?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm excited about it.
Why is that a hopeful situation?
Well, and it is. I mean, I think the average age of the American farmer right now is like 56 years old. And so not only will there be quite a little land start changing hands, for that next generation, but the next generation, it really is. And I think of the time since I started, which was in 1984, I mean, that was very tough times, high interest rates and stuff. And my dad, why would you ever want to go into farming? And to Noah's point, what can we do to get people excited about that? And I think in commodity agriculture in the Midwest, it's the technology that's exciting this next generation. And literally, there's a ton of that next generation. My son just gave up his engineering job here 1st of March and started farming full time. It's maybe a little bit scary, but it's all that, the way agriculture has changed, the things that we can do. And honestly, right now, everybody's talking about food and how food is grown and raised. And so it's an opportunity for agriculture to be part of that conversation. So I think that's what it is. In our area in South Dakota, I mean, we see the technical schools and the colleges, there's 3 times the number that were in the ag classes than what it was when I was in there in the 80s. And so to me, it's that next generation that knows what's happening as we're getting older, and the excitement about the technology and the food movement, if you want to say, they want to be part of that. And so I truly am. I'm optimistic. I think agriculture, we're placed and we're changing, we're doing things for the right reasons, and we need to continue down that path.
So that's interesting, because we were talking about the perception of farmers and getting more young people in. And Karen, you talked about the need to get people to understand the cost and value of food. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I run, my farming partners, we run 2 markets. We run a high-end market and we run a low-end market. And so in the low-end market, where in underserved communities, what you normally see is that we're surrounded by a charity-based food system, a subsidized-based food system, whereby in order to really fix, quote unquote, the food system, which is not broken, but people are giving out food from Monday to Saturday, okay? So when people come to our farmers market and they have to literally pay, for instance, $2 for a bunch of carrots, people say, well, why do I have to pay $2 for a bunch of carrots where I can get it from the food pantry? And so there needs to be an educational piece behind the cost and value of food. And I say that because I have to present myself as the farmer, and there's a cost and value in that in order for me to come down and to have this farmer's market, it took resources that I had to put out of my pocket to buy the seed, to harvest, to bring it down. And so there's a cost and value to that. Now, initially, people sort of squawk with that. But once people started to understand the cost and value of food, then they realized, you know what? They can pay for it. Because I think the society has placed so much on materialistic things, and when people talk to me and they have the Michael Jordan shoes on and they got the Samsung iPhones in front of me, then I got to tell them, I said, you know what, we need to sort of have this educational piece about food, because food and water are both human rights. And we don't have that conversation. It's most on materialistic things. And also I just want to say something about the young farmers that are out there, because if you would have told me like 10, 15 years ago that black and brown people want to farm, I would say no. But now people understand that a history that has been robbed from us, why we were brought here because of a knowledge of agriculture. And as a result, you're seeing a resurgence of black, young, and brown farmers, people that want to be farmers, because they understand the relationship to ownership of land, their relationship to soil, the relationship to their history, and they want to be part of this movement, not to be second citizens or be consumers, but they want to be farmer, and they understand the power of land ownership, and that's really important.
All right. Sorry. We're out of time. That was very quick. Thank you. That was a good ending. Yeah, crazy.